Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Izita Maureen. I am the CEO at Rise Recovery, and we are here to share some conversation, share some time with a couple of wonderful guests today. For those who are not familiar, Rise Recovery, our focus is on really addressing substance use and the impacts of substance use for youth, young adults, and their families. And we do that through partnering with our community in education and prevention and direct intervention. So our goal today is to really bring that community message out to our world, those who are familiar with recovery, those who are not, those who are curious, and particularly for those in San Antonio who have access to Rise Recovery services at no cost. We really hope that you enjoy this episode. So our subject today is anonymous use. And what that means, why I called this episode that, is because there are a number of youth in direct recovery from addiction that you may or may not know about. That I can remember my days as an adolescent and not having any concept of recovery, of abstinence, of sobriety. These words were foreign to me. I knew the kids who didn't touch it because they weren't exposed and the kids who did. And there was no real in between or no journey after that I ever heard about. And so this episode is really about exploring a day in the life of a young person seeking recovery. So for that, I invited two really special guests. We have Nigel Cunningham-Williams, who is a youth peer coach and a young person in recovery who was struggling with and overcame addiction in his young age. And then also Natalie Mosqueda, a young person in recovery. They are very familiar with Rise Recovery, both in their personal journey, but also as later on as servants of the mission. And now they've got many other goals above and beyond that. We're just so proud to watch them grow, watch them flourish from beginning to end. And this is our opportunity to learn a little bit about what a day in the life of their journey was. So with that, I will ask them my first question that I'm so curious about, which is, tell me what adolescence was like for you. Who would like to go?
All right. Well, for me, a big part of my story is I'm dual diagnosis, which means I also struggle not only with substance use disorder, I also deal with things like depression and anxiety. So that has always been kind of intertwined in my adolescence. I spent a lot of time in and out of mental hospitals dealing with those kind of co-occurring disorders. And with that, I had a very troubling adolescence. I was in and out of school. If I didn't want to go, I wasn't going to go. At first, it was because of my depression and mental health. But once I found drugs could hide those symptoms, it was because I wasn't going to school because I'd rather be getting high. So I spent a lot of time alone and trying to find friends and a sense of belonging and just never being able to connect with people. So it was lonely. It was very lonely.
When did, Natalie, when were drugs or alcohol introduced in your timeline, and how old were you?
So it took me a long time to figure this out, and it was actually some of the staff at Rise and the people that I went to treatment with that kind of helped me realize this. I always thought it was 8th grade. It was actually 6th grade. I was taking my prescription medication as I felt I should take them, and not as the doctor felt. And I always thought that, well, it's prescribed to me, so it doesn't matter. I'm not abusing them. So it did start in 6th grade with prescription pills. And then later developed into some more other drugs. And I would say it got the worst my 8th grade freshman year, and I was in treatment by the end of my sophomore year of high school.
Did you know anyone like you in your world, in your school, and
Definitely did. Unfortunately, one of the sadder things that comes with substance use disorder and addiction is overdoses and deaths. So my best friend died of an overdose in January of 2012, and that really just kind of pitfalled me. And I was in rehab within the year. I think that really opened my eyes to the devastating, like destructive nature of what was actually happening. I think another part, though, is I was able to, I think for a lot of people in recovery, especially young people, we're so able to look at others and say, I'm not that bad because I just have not had enough life experience to get that bad yet. So I was able to do a lot of denial by looking at some of the older people who have had life experience to get into more trouble. And since I was just young and hadn't gone through it, it took me a while to realize that, yes, my addiction was serious and I did need help.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Nigel, talk to us about your adolescence.
Growing up, I had a super loving and supportive family. I think I wasn't one of those kids that they talk about sometimes, and other programs are like, oh, these are the neglected kids or like inner city kids. Like I grew up on an Air Force base with both my parents there. I mean, they were too supportive. They loved me too much, right? Like they didn't miss a Little League game, they didn't miss a single flag football game, and I hated sports. So externally, I had all the things necessary to like have a happy childhood and to be extremely happy and productive. Even education was a huge priority to my parents. Internally, though, I just felt broken apart. I didn't feel like I really fit in with anybody. And, I couldn't pinpoint what it is, whether it was, being one of the only black children in my school or, I was chubby and nerdy, back then. I couldn't pinpoint what it was that made me so different, but I knew that I felt like I couldn't quite fit in with anybody. Puberty kicked in, and once I kind of had the means to react differently, I did. I wasn't the short kid you could pick on anymore. I got a lot bigger, and that immediately turned into violence. Before I dabbled with substances, I was just so full of rage. And doing this work we talked about, going through my own inner inventory, I realized that a lot of that rage was deeply rooted in fear. But I didn't really have the emotional kind of vocabulary to voice that or to work through that, so it just turned to violence. Into my teenage years, I think it took me 6 high schools to graduate. And I got great grades. It was never an educational problem. Whenever they would test me, I tested incredible. And so they loved to keep me in the district. But, with, my kind of violent tendencies every now and again, at first, coupled with my later drug use, it made it really hard for me to stay inside of a district for more than 6 months to a year. I graduated early. Like I said, the grades were never a problem. I think by the time I graduated, I'd been to 2 or 3 treatment centers already. So my adolescence was just peppered in with these negative consequences and me trying my best to remedy what was going on in my head. Getting into recovery was so beneficial to me because when I did, and I could finally see how my brain operated, free of substances and free of, all the crazy stuff that happens in the teenager's brain, I realized I had bipolar disorder. And so I got that diagnosed, and I could really start getting a handle on my feelings and, find a way to express myself and to cope healthily. People think that, take the life you have and remove substances and you have success. But substances gave me things that I needed initially. It helped me calm myself. It helped me feel happy when I wanted to. I could feel confident when I needed to. I could feel calm when I wanted to. And so a huge, aspect of this sobriety thing that we talk about, right, is that mental health component is saying, how do I find a way to get all the things that I got from substances? And how do I find a way to get more things that I got from substances without relying on those things? So building up those healthy coping skills and understanding who I am really was kind of the paramount part of this recovery process.
Thank you, Nigel. We talked with Natalie a little bit about what was the first age of introduction. I know in Bexar County the average age of first use is about 13 years old. What is your experience with that?
My first one was 12, and I know you've heard me say this 1,000 times, but I would go to those drug awareness things, those things they'd hold in the school, and they told you, watch out for the guy on the corner, and I knew that. If there's some shady guy on the corner, like hanging out in the alley, like wearing a hoodie, even though it's summer in Texas, like stay away from him. And I did a really good job of avoiding him. Unfortunately, that guy doesn't really exist. The way that we portray substances isn't the way that it comes across in the movies or even in some of our informational packets. The first person to introduce me to substances was a friend of mine at band camp, and after that, the next person was a guy that I met in math class. And they had strengthened that muscle to say no to a stranger, but they never really strengthened that muscle to say no to a friend or someone who you looked up to.
That's really That's interesting. I've thought a lot about that Just Say No campaign, and why is it, do you think, we sort of externalize this other as being responsible for drugs and alcohol, and instead of ourselves and our internal needs, our allies? Why do you think our society does that and wants to make it this bad guy that somehow and talk about only the negatives of drugs without exploring with kids that, when they take it, they might actually feel good, and this is why still they shouldn't take it. Talk to me about that.
Well, one, when it comes to kids in general, it's a really tricky subject. I mean, there's a lot of other, areas that involve children and adolescents that we don't like to look at to make ourselves feel better. But at the end of the day, it's so much easier to try to absolve ourselves of any guilt. It's an ugly problem. And honestly, the road ahead it's going to be, difficult, tough to tackle. And so some people would rather choose to pretend that it's not there. And also because society in itself is partially to blame. I don't believe people come out into this world just looking for substances for the most part. It's the society that we live in. It's how we view ourselves in that society. It's how we find our place in our society. It's our generational like curses sometimes that play a huge factor into this. And people don't really want to take credit. My parents were incredible, but I saw the pain they went through watching me go through what I was going through because they couldn't help feeling like they were to blame. They weren't, but society is constantly telling parents, if your kid winds up using substances, it's a result of poor parenting. And that's so not the case. And so people want to feel guilt-free. People want to feel like it's someone else's problem. But until we get out of that they-them notion and get into this we-us, kind of way of thinking, it's not going to get better. But I have seen a change, looking at how the drug epidemic was treated in the 80s versus where we're at now in 2020. It is getting better. We are a world getting better in this aspect, but there's still so much more to be done and still so far to go.
Yeah. Thank you. I want to talk a little bit about, we talked about first stage of use. Talk to me about when you were first interested in not using anymore, or maybe the time where you felt like I need a change and I need to look for something that ended up being recovery. What was that like for you, and what was surprising to you about that journey?
So I think there's a number of instances in my life or throughout my career, using substances that I probably thought this isn't the right thing for me. I think the first one came after the first severe negative consequence. I'd gotten in trouble. My parents thought that military school was the way to go. And so when you wind up in Harlingen, Texas, getting a buzz cut in the middle of summer instead of having summer vacation, you're like, maybe this isn't the right path for me. But it's still so hard because when you're using these kind of substances, when you're living that lifestyle, your brain, because of what you're putting into your body, and your peer group makes you feel like it's normal. I mean, it's so easy to get wrapped up into it. When you look around the world around you and everyone's doing what you're doing, it's so easy to believe that the whole world is this way, and it's not.
Wow.
A lot like Natalie, it took someone succumbing to their addiction for me to kind of realize it. I was 20 years old. I was in treatment for the 6th time. I'd kind of come to the end of my rope. And a former participant from Rise actually had unfortunately taken his own life. And we were not even that close. We really weren't. We were friends and we were friendly, and I knew him. And my mom had come to get me from the treatment center that I was staying in and took me to the funeral. So I'm sitting there and I'm kind of looking around, this church, and seeing people that I had essentially grown up with, and seeing where we had landed and where our lives had brought us. And the fact that I was only here on a day pass from treatment again, but really looking at his mother and seeing him, kind of up there, no longer alive, and sitting next to my mom, put it in perspective, I realized that this wasn't a question of drugs or not drugs. It was a matter of fact that I wasn't happy, and I had not been happy in so long. And so when I tried to make a list of reasons why that wouldn't be me laying in that box up there, I found myself coming up short. Looking at the life that I was living and the way that my life was headed, I couldn't come up with maybe 5 reasons why that wouldn't be me outside of a year. And that's when things really got big. And I think it's what we have to tell people that want help, is that it's not about drugs or not drugs. It's about, are you happy? And I wasn't.
How about you, Natalie? What was your experience?
I was definitely in a lot of denial. Along with dual diagnosis, I grew up in a household of divorced parents. And so I think for a lot of people, including myself, it was very easy to dismiss certain kind of red flag behaviors as she's dealing with depression, she's dealing with her parents' relationship. And it wasn't until things were like at a breaking point that we all kind of had to wake up and be like, no, this is about drugs. I don't think the school or my parents or anybody wanted to say Natalie has a drug problem. They wanted to be able to say, oh, she just needs more medication. She just needs a therapy for her parents' relationship. And it really wasn't until I was in rehab that I honestly sat down and thought, like, maybe there's a problem here. I remember, like, still knowing I was getting sent to treatment and, like, getting high and doing the virtual tour of this rehab with my friends and being like, this is hilarious. Like, this is a huge joke. I don't have a problem. I don't know why they're sending me here. And it was, like, 2 a.m., and I couldn't sleep, and I was thinking about my life choices, and I went and I spoke to some of the people who worked there. And for like hours, I was just like, well, is this normal? And like, is this normal? And it was that conversation that finally woke me up to say there is some issues here. So like, is it normal that I sold all of my clothes for drug money and like they all have really nice clothes and I have my like one pair of tatted sweatpants? And they're like, absolutely not. And so those kind of questions of just kind of starting to look at some of the things in my life really woke me up. And it was the rehab I went to had like a 30-day and then a 60-day program. And I actually called my mom the next day and I was like, I don't want to leave. I need to stay. Like, I don't want to be here for 30 days. I need the full term treatment. So once I realized I had a problem, I was in it for the long haul.
Yeah. And what kind of treatment worked for you? I know, there's a lot of options out there, and parents don't know where to start or what works and what doesn't. It's not as easy as sort of handing someone to a hospital and having the specialist say this is what they need. How do you figure that out?
So I know for me, I've been to the mental hospital a lot. I went 3 times in 1 year, and then I just kept going. I was at one of these hospitals that specifically only deals with mental health, and we were talking, and I said, well, I'm not going to stop using until I die. And so they said, well, then we can't help you. So I think finding those places that will treat substance use. And then I also, along with Rise Recovery, I also was going to another 12-step program, and I think it's just finding those things that work for you and realizing that just because it works for somebody else doesn't mean it will work for you, and just trying out what works. I am a big proponent for as long with 12-step programs is also going to therapy. That's what works for me. Is I definitely need multiple avenues for my recovery to stay in that like constant state of well-being.
So how old were you both when you decided not to start sobriety? How long have y'all been in recovery?
So I have 8 years. My sobriety date is June 1st of 2012, and I was 16.
16, Nigel?
6 years. I was 20 years old. I got sober December 9th, 2014, and I'm 26 now.
Wow. And what role, if any, did Rise Recovery play in your sobriety? What was that about?
I know for me, it was a huge role. Before I found Rise, I was at a different 12-step program that was more geared towards adults. And it was really hard for me because I would come in and be like, God, I just did awful on my math test and my teachers suck. And like my friends think I'm a narc because I won't get high with them anymore. They're like, yeah, I'm having a baby and like getting married. So I couldn't connect to the people there. It was kind of funny. Someone who was another participant, a past participant of Rise, had seen me and said, you look really young. Let me show you this new place that might be geared more towards you. And that's how I found Rise. And from like the moment I stepped in that door, first it is very awkward when you first come in because they're like, someone will be like, this is Natalie, she's new. And then everyone's like, oh my God, Natalie, I love you. We're so glad you're here. And they want to hug you. And it's a little.
Yeah, we freak people out.
It's a little much at first, but that was something I looked forward to. Life at home was still really hard for me. My parents were still fighting. There was still a lot going on. I have other members of my family who also struggle with substance use and addiction. So I want to say, as I remember, it would open at like 12 p.m. and I would be sitting on the steps outside of Ironside at 11. Like, I lived there. I would be the first person to show up before the staff, and then whoever was the last person to walk out the door would be the person who drove me home. So I'd literally be there for like 12 hours a day. Because if they would get done around 10, I'd get home at 11. So it was my home for a very long time. They helped me through a lot of things, and I think something that's really cool about being a young person in recovery is you get to learn how to be a person in recovery. It was one of the staff members who taught me how to pump gas. It was another staff member who taught me how to drive my car. Like, they would help me when I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. They're like, okay, well, let's drive around the block. Like, I had my license, don't worry. But
HR, stop listening to this.
Right.
Yes.
But I mean, when I was like, I don't understand, like, what am I supposed to do? Like, they would help me with those kind of life things as well.
Awesome.
I still talk to my counselor there. He helps me fix my car sometimes. My battery broke in my car the other week, and he's like, no problem, Mija, I'll be right over. So I still have like everlasting connections that, like,
awesome.
It's changed my life.
I think Rise got to be my first example at sobriety. You know, I went through when I was like 15 or 16, and crazy enough, so we missed each other by like maybe a week or two. Like, my last meeting was like a week away from her first meeting, because when we first met, we went over like, you know, who do you know? Like, there's a huge overlap, so we must have just missed each other. But Rise definitely, you know, showed me sobriety could be fun. And again, I didn't even want it. That's how fun Rise Recovery is, that even when you don't want recovery, you still want to be there. Like, I know when I first got there, I had no intention of stopping or getting sober at all. And then you hang out with them. It's like, I still want to hang out with you guys. Like, do you want to get sober? It's like, no, but you guys are really fun. And so that was my first, you know, glimpse into how fun recovery could be. But, you know, I think it's an important thing that Rise offers is that family component, because even though I had stopped my journey of sobriety for a little bit, you know, as a teenager, my parents were still receiving services. And so when things would go south for me, even if I wasn't willing to go into a meeting or go into a one-on-one, my parents could still get support from their end and figure out how to parent me a little bit. To get support from that, I think almost every time I went to treatment, my parents had called Rise first and figured out, okay, cool, like, how do we do this? How do we navigate these things? Because trying to find treatment is probably one of the hardest things to do for yourself, let alone for a child. I mean, you're trying to become a master at something as it's your first time through, and it's for someone you care about. So you're tired because the nights are, you know, sleepless, and you're worried, and now you're trying to compare resources and figure out, you know, okay, what's a 12-step meeting? What's a sponsor-based program? Like, what do all these things mean? So Rise Recovery was a huge help to my parents in kind of walking through those doors and figuring out how to get me the help that I needed. And then on top of that, you know, I think it was my 1 year sobriety day, or a little bit before that, and I saw Natalie at an outside 12-step meeting, and she said, "Hey, like, we're starting this new program. You should come work for us." And I was like, "Nah, I'm good. I don't like kids. I didn't like kids when I was." And I was like, you know what? Okay, I'll give it a shot. And so Rise hired me on my, you know, 1 year sobriety day, and that helped save my life, because it helped keep me tied to the program, and especially, you know, being 21, 22 years old. And having lived through addiction, you know, my self-confidence and my self-worth was not that high. And so to immediately be able to do life-changing work and to help people and help my community and help young people try to avoid what I've been through, that was a huge saving grace. And it's definitely saved my life a few times, knowing that people needed me and counted on me. So even working there was a huge, huge help to my recovery.
I have a question that I think everybody wants to know, and that's about dating in recovery, especially when you're a young person. We are streaming on platforms. Audience, please ask questions, comment, share your thoughts. Healthy relationships are so important.
Yes.
What tips do you have? What tips do you have for young people in recovery who want to date, because it's going to happen.
So we're dating, which is which is a fun thing.
What?
I know, right?
Who knew?
I would tell, for good tips, don't do anything we did. It was so not a
I know, we sat down and talked when we were looking over the questions last night, and that one popped up, and we're both just like, don't do it. But I mean, you definitely can.
Absolutely.
I think the biggest thing, for me at least, is that we have my life, and then he has his life, and then we have our life together, and that does not mean that we share our lives. Like, we have pieces of our lives we share together, but not our entire life. And recovery is a huge part of that. I need to know about what he's doing in his recovery. He doesn't need to know about mine. We can check in with each other and see how things are going. But having separate sponsors, having separate meetings, and just having that aspect of my life be something separate. I think that's the biggest thing that I would suggest, is that you need to have your recovery be your own. I know for a lot of people, codependency is huge. And so having that just separated, and like, if you need Al-Anon, go to Al-Anon. That's a great other program for people in recovery who are also dating people in recovery. And like Rise Recovery, go to their family meetings. Like, that's another huge, great thing for that kind of stuff. I know you had some good tips too.
Yeah, I mean, that's Nat touched on it huge. Like, that's the big thing, is that Natalie does not keep me sober. I don't keep her sober. Mm-hmm. And I would never pick Natalie over my own recovery. And I know especially in the rooms, a lot of 12-step communities, other resources, they talk about don't date. But it's not dating that's the problem. It's that you put something before your recovery. And so you can pick anything. You could pick a job. You could put that before your recovery and lose your recovery. You could pick, I'm going to mend the fence with my family. It's like, maybe your family isn't a good idea. You could put anything you want before recovery. It's just a lot of people try to pick a relationship and put that before their program. And that's what happens. So that's number one. And number two, recovery is a community. And so you should have a whole bunch of people around you that you can trust and that love you. Run it by them. Like, if you talk to your sponsor and your spiritual advisor and your friends, like, hey, I think I'm ready to date. It's like, well, you're not. I would listen to them. I think the one thing we did do right was that Natalie had, 3? And I had you had almost 4 and I had almost 2 years sober before we ever decided to be a couple, which is great. We'd both been through our steps. We had both been working in the field for a while. So give yourself enough time to put yourself together as a person is a huge thing. Also, don't move in with each other right away. It's such a bad idea. We did it, and it was great. It was great. We loved it. But we got really, really lucky that it worked for us. We spent the first couple years of our relationship in a one-room apartment. It was one room. It was just us every day. A lot of
potential there.
Yeah. We just lived in one room, and then we worked together. So we lived in one room, and then we'd leave the room together and go to work.
And then we would come back to the room. And if you got lucky, you could close the curtains, and that would be your private time.
Yeah, so
you really have to love each other.
Yeah, you really do. But again, it's about having my own life. We don't share one life. We have our own lives, and we share our lives. But we don't share one life. And my recovery has nothing to do with it. So we've even talked about that. If one of us should happen to relapse, there is no kind of notion that, we'll relapse together, or, what, I'll stay with you no matter what. If Natalie decides that she wants to return to that lifestyle, she's free to do so, but I want to accompany her. I love her to death. I probably love Natalie almost more than life itself. But I don't go back to that lifestyle for anybody.
No, we have. Having those conversations that are hard conversations, but what would we do if this happened? And I know for us, it's if you relapse, you are going straight to treatment, and you are not allowed in our house. You cannot come here. You need to go figure your things out, and I will not be a part of it. So having those tough conversations, and just a lot of, in any relationship, no matter if you're in your recovery or not, is that communication aspect. Just being on the same page about things.
Yeah, and relapse doesn't mean I don't love you anymore. It just means that you're no longer safe for yourself, and you're not safe for me, and we need to take a break and take a step away, and maybe we can talk again about the future. So again, we haven't got that far into it, because neither one of us plans on on doing that.
Right.
But if one of us should happen to, it's like, we need to take a break. You need to work on yourself, and then we can talk again in the future about what happens. But again, I would not be happy if Natalie put me before her program, and I wouldn't put her before mine.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting that what you are saying as young people in recovery sounds so much like what moms and dads have to learn to say to their kids, and to set that boundary to say, this is not safe for the household. This is not safe for me. These are the ground rules. These are the expectations. Talk to me a little bit about, I heard you say that we blame, oftentimes society blames parents, bad parenting. And what we find a lot is that our parents are actually oftentimes hyper invested, too invested, loving their kids to death is what the kind of the term that comes to mind. And so talk to me about, one, you mentioned codependency. Not everybody knows what that means. For any teenager here, that may be a what, to explain that, and where that importance of parental, support comes in a young person's recovery.
Take codependency, I'll take parents.
Oh,
okay. So codependency is that kind of notion that I need you to be okay to be okay. And when it's great, it's great. When they're doing great, you feel incredible. But when they don't feel good, you don't have the ability to feel okay. And I cannot imagine if my emotional nature wasn't tied to just myself. If I had to be having a good day and have her be having a good day in order to have a good day, and that just isn't fair to do to myself. And so in relationships, it's a huge thing to do. And people do it because it does feel good. It feels good to be needed, and it feels good to be wanted and to be vital to somebody. But I think we had that talk maybe early on in our relationship that I don't want to be needed. I just want to be wanted, if that makes any sense. Because I know for a fact that Natalie doesn't need me to be okay. If I were to leave, do whatever, Natalie would be fine. I don't want to be needed. I want to be wanted. And I think that's kind of how we avoid that codependency, is that there is no notion that I can't exist without her, or vice versa. It's a want and not a need. When we look at parents, I mean, it's so easy. And again, I can't fathom that bond they have to not be able to be okay if your kid isn't okay. But I think, and you like said, loving them to death. I think there's everything that you can do in providing all the resources, and that's great to do that. But when we talk about another person, they're a factor we can't change. You can want your kid to get sober, and you can do everything it could take for them to have the best chance at getting it. But if they don't want it, they don't want it. And so if and when you reach that point, you have to ask yourself, I can't hate my life or be afraid to live my life because of them. I can't commit to never being okay again if they don't get better. So how do I find a way to be okay if they're not okay? And it's a very long process, but it's totally worth it. I know with my parents dealing with me and my addiction and in my early recovery, it took a huge toll on the family. Everyone felt it. I was the only one getting high, but everyone suffered in the household. And so my mom used to have a phrase that she would kind of tell us and tell herself that she would say is, I'm not going to let you steal my joy. And I think she wasn't really talking to me, but she was talking a lot to the circumstance that, you know what, I'm going to find joy despite this. And she would take her time. She would find things that made her happy. She would engage in her hobbies, but she had to find a way to be happy, because we all do.
Mm-hmm. Powerful. Natalie, any other thoughts there?
Not really. I had some of the opposite experience with my parental figures.
Sure.
Is I think I was easily dismissed. So I think that is another side of it as well, is the parents that love too much, and then the parents that, not that they were bad parents, it was just there was so many other things going on. We have a very large family. There was 6 kids, that it was easy when we all have our own crises going on to dismiss people. So I think for some children and adolescents, it is easy. And I was able to play into that and notice that if I don't act up too much, no one's going to notice that I'm using. So I can just keep kind of using under the radar until it came to that boiling point where it couldn't be ignored anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And that might be where a lot of kids find themselves right now during this pandemic, is kind of, their parents are trying to steer the ship, keep things afloat, can't tend to some of the mental health support that maybe their kids need. What is your guidance for those parents who feel like I might be missing something and I don't know, and I'm too busy to manage it, or a message to those kids?
Yeah, I think just asking is a big thing. Like, that's one thing looking back is no one ever really sat me down and was like, so what's the actual issue here? They would speculate and make up their own ideas in their own heads, but no one actually sat down and was like, hey, so what's going on with you? So I looking back, I probably would have lied and been like, well, it's not drugs, but I think that's the big thing, is just asking and paying attention to some of those behaviors that maybe this might not be right. This doesn't look normal, some of those things. And I think for the kids and the adolescents and teenagers that have parents that are just too busy, is there's other people in your lives. Some of my biggest supporters are my teachers. Before I found Rise, it was the teachers who were the ones that were bringing up concerns that they had about me to some of the school counselors. And so it was those people in my life who were able to start to bring light to some of the issues I was having. So if you don't think your parents are paying attention, look elsewhere. There's other people in your life that are definitely paying attention and care about you and want you to be better. I think I felt that since my parents were so busy that they didn't care. But they did. They definitely cared. And I know there's other people that definitely care about me in my life. And just finding those people that you feel safe and comfortable talking to, and talk to them and let them know what's really going on.
I think in terms of parents, a lot of the work is done before before the actual event happens. Mm-hmm. Like, we do fire drills and tornado drills. So if this happens, we know what to do. A lot of the groundwork is laid before they're ever in trouble, creating an environment that fosters love, that fosters honesty and compassion. It's going to pay off in spades if and when they run into trouble. If they know that you're someone that they can turn on, that they can turn to, or someone they can rely on, they're going to be way more forthcoming if and when they do need help. If you've done the work before the crisis ever happens, And that's a lot, what Rise did for me. They planted that seed in my mind about recovery, about kind of wanting to change well before I ever wanted to. And then when it was time to, they were who I turned back to. Like I said, the first time I went there, I didn't want it, but because they did the work and they cared and they listened before, when I did want the help, I knew who to talk to. And in terms of, kids looking for help, help's out there. I know we're all stuck inside, to a degree, some varying depending on where you're watching from. But recovery, it's not a secret anymore. And it's not hard to find. Recovery, it's everywhere. It's all walks of life. It's all ages. It's every city. So if you want help and you need help, it's out there. It's a click away in some cases, maybe a phone call away, but you're never alone in this. It might feel that way, and that's kind of how addiction thrives, but none of us are ever alone, and we're only as alone as we want to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so true. And I think, and I'll just make a plug for Rise Recovery Services, is that if a parent doesn't know where to take them, drop them off with Rise counselors. If you can't access, we've got virtual meetings, we've got virtual peer support, we've got ways to connect in your own home now, thanks to this pandemic, that are making recovery more accessible for you, for your parent, for your loved one. And it's just a phone call away. And I think my last question for you is, talk to me about where you're at today. What are y'all doing? Where are you going? What this is your recovery journey, and where is it taking you?
Perfect. I'll go first. Beyond my wildest dreams, I think I made a list of what I wanted to do as I got sober, like what I was capable of, and I've surpassed that I don't know how many times over now, and way quicker than I thought. I thought getting sober was like, drugs are what helped me be creative, helped me make the music that I want to make, and I've done way more for my music career than I ever did, when I was using. Even the people that I was around were so content to just exist. We would sit and we would imagine what we would do when we got famous, but never put any work to get in there. And now whether it's Natalie, my best friends, my family, everyone in my life that I hang out with are all hardworking, driving, and push me to go to my goals. And so I've got to do more shows, meet more people, go further with my career than I ever thought was possible. So, in terms of achieving my dreams, I'm doing it. I live with the love of my life, which is incredible. I have my whole family back. I mean, my parents wanted nothing to do with me when this started. And then for my 2-year anniversary, they gave me a key back to the house. I didn't even need it. I had my own house that I lived in, but it was symbolic that, like, hey, you're welcome here whenever you want. My sister will call and text me and tell me stupid jokes that are ridiculous, but there was a time when she didn't want to talk to me at all. And so now they talk to me too much. So I got back everything I had lost, and then I gained some. But again, if all that didn't happen, if I didn't have Nat or a car or my apartment or all those things, I'm happy today. I can wake up and be happy, and I don't have to pay for it. And I like myself. If all the other stuff went away, when I go to bed at night, when I wake up in the morning, I like myself. I love myself. And I can't really put a price on that, but I know I wouldn't have that if it wasn't for getting sober.
Yeah, you got yourself back.
Yeah, I think that's important. Is like Nigel did not mention any sort of materialistic things. Like, I think recovery is all about like changing your inner self. I know for me, it's a lot of the same. Just like, I am comfortable with who I am in my own skin. I no longer need to feel like I'm not living in myself. I'm comfortable with who I am. I love who I am. And I think what's important is recovery brings so much good to your life, but it is a journey that keeps on going. It's never over. I know, especially with the pandemic, it's been bringing up a lot of stuff for a lot of people. And that's something in myself too. Like, I've been having to work harder on my recovery and harder on my mental health journey as well. But again, there's so much that I mean, when I was young, I didn't think I was going to like live past 18. So I didn't really have like long-term goals. So it's insane how my life has turned out and how beautiful it is. And, my family is amazing. There's a lot. I was never really able to connect to my brothers, and so that being able to host family game nights, we do virtual family game nights now with the pandemic, and everyone's spread across the country. So being able to reconnect with them, friendships was a huge thing. I always wanted to have friends, and I thought I had friends, but the friendships I have now are just so meaningful and impactful, and it's that true connection rather than we have drugs, so we'll hang out. So those are some of those really good things. Again, Nigel, my life would be fine without him, but it's beautiful with him. And I'm so glad he's here.
Let's just end right there.
I'm not good with the love talk. I'm not. I'm sorry.
Nigel's a poet. It's okay.
Yeah. But yeah.
I love it. Well, at Rise, we've had the pleasure of being able to work with you both. And at Rise Recovery, we take pride when people, unlike many organizations, when people leave our organization, because so many of the people we hire are people who started out in our program, just like you all. And this is for many of them, it's their first job, or they've had a lot of challenges to finding work, and or their backgrounds make things challenging to pursue goals. And we want to be that place, that first place, or that developing place. And when people leave to do things like you two have done, to pursue higher education and your passions and your music career, things like that. I mean, I want to be the person who buys the ticket to Nigel's concert, not the person who holds on to you for 25 years, because that's not what we are about. We're about turning, really transforming people into themselves, into their best selves. And a lot of times that's to radiate much bigger than where you start. So I'm so grateful to spend this time with you today. Absolutely. It's been such a pleasure. And I miss you all. I mean, I miss seeing you all, not just because, Natalie, because you're, doing things outside of Rise, but because this pandemic has made so much of our work virtual. And we just can't see each other in the same way. But through this, I hope this message has touched other people, young people who are curious about what it's like to be in recovery, what a day in the life of that journey looks like, and hopefully receive heard some incredible things. What resonated with me a lot was hearing Nigel talk about the resilience we give our kids to say no to strangers, but not necessarily to those who are closest to us. And Natalie, your story resonates with me so much. I relate very much to your experiences. And, we have parents of all kinds, but it's really about us finding our way. It's about us finding the people who are paying attention and who are in our lane and on our team. And I think all of us are capable of doing that. We're only as alone as we want to be, as Nigel said. And we're here. Rise Recovery is here for you and for our community, our youth, young adults, and families who need us. Thank you so very much. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. Talk to you later.